Good morning, good morning, good morning, and good morning. Good morning, YouTube. Good morning, universe, and good morning, sunshines. Happy Wednesday, y'all. We are all awake. Well, unless you're on a replay, you might still be asleep, but we are all still here on this earthly planet in this dimension together today. Thank you for being here and tuning in if you are live with me or just listening with me. Good morning, learning. Good morning, sunshine. I hope you have a beautifully blessed day today. Hey, girl, hey. All right. We are in our Across That Bridge book, John Lewis, telling us today about the politics of truth. This one is a little, well, it's not as long as the next one that's coming up, child. Peace is long, girl. But this one is a little long, so bear with me. And we already know that when we get into the politicalizations of it all, I do get off track sometimes. So I apologize in advance. I do try to keep my political opinions to myself on these YouTube streets, but this is a politically uplifting spiritually book, so it is what it ain't. All right, this is truth. The truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. Winston Churchill. The truth is a powerful force. It is the foundation of all things. The truth is so all-consuming that it cannot be denied. You cannot erase the truth. You cannot tarnish the truth. You cannot whitewash the truth. It is bigger than the sum of us all and whole even in its parts. And yet, even though the truth can't be denied or erased, it can systematically be obscured, strategically misinterpreted, and hidden from mainstream comprehension. I already got to pause right there, child, because the people in Texas that create our textbooks that we use to teach from are trying to change the narrative of what slavery was. Our faith in the movement was that we could peel back the falsehood of all our conditioning, scrape away the hard, crusty cynicism of our politics, and peer through to the root of social dysfunction. That journey beyond the limits of normal discourse will lead to the central, simple principles of life, based on the unfathomable, massive bedrock of the truth. In the SNCC, a leaderless organization, we view consensus as a guiding principle. Sometimes we will spend all night, even days, as a group discussing the merits of one idea until all the opposition was quieted and all conflict subsided. Ultimately, the dissolution of the SNCC at its core emanated around different perceptions of the truth. The quest for the truth was the center of Gandhi's nonviolent activism. Much of his prayer and spiritual practice focused on arriving at an ever more pure understanding of eternal truth, according to his faith. He believed that individual revelation about actions that violate the dignity of any manifestation of life energy, whether human, animal, or biological, conferred a responsibility to act without compromise or regression. That accounts for his stripping away much of the trappings of his life as a lawyer. It is why he took up the simple dress, lifestyle, and occupation of the Indian villager who he believed represented the essence of Indian life. The search for truth must be a vital part of any activist's life or that of any movement because it conveys meaning to action and it mandates constant learning, evaluation, self criticism, and a constantly rejuvenated comprehension of a movement's core principles. We believed if we anchored ourselves firmly on that bedrock and used nonviolent action to demonstrate the truth with an unwavering faith, then we could shine a light that would expose the lie of segregation. We were prepared for what this might mean. We knew that Americans had become so comfortable with misconceptions of separation, inferiority, superiority, and the significance of superficial difference that many would be very disturbed when exposed to the light of the truth. We knew the brutality of our everyday life was manufactured to corral everyone to submit to an unholy order. We knew this lie would not die easily. Child, we still living in that, where lies are more prevalent than the truth. We have a whole, I think about half of our citizens in this country believe January 6th wasn't what it was. Like, what? That it you can't even comprehend how it's even a question about what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, right? But we have a whole, I'm not even going to say political party because it is what it is. About half of our country does not believe, or they're just lying to themselves and to us publicly, that it actually happened and it was what it was. They tried to overthrow our government. Like, that's really what happened. We knew this lie would not die easily, but we were also convinced it could never last. So we made a decision to step outside the matrix of everyday life, ground ourselves in the eternal truth, and follow its lead no matter where it took us. The civil rights movement was more than a struggle over legal rights. It was a spiritual movement led by ministers who wanted to confront the erroneous belief that some of us are more valuable or important than others and demonstrate the truth of human equality. Those believers did not debate or fight about this. They did not threaten or mock. They did not malign or degrade their opponents. They simply took action based on the transcendence of unity in an attempt to bear witness to the truth. Hello, Eagles. How are you? How you doing today? Good morning, sunshine. It's good to see you here. I haven't seen you in like forever. Thank you for being here. Thank you, and thank you. Most people today don't understand. It was not only frowned upon, but illegal for Black people to sit down and eat at a segregated lunch counter. I'm going to read that again, y'all, because this is one of the things that I struggle with, especially about rules and laws and all of the things and the judgment that comes from these rules and these laws that our society creates, dismantles, recreates, and does its own thing, right? Most people today don't understand. It was not only frowned upon, so society had a general rule that Black people could not sit down and eat at lunch counters, certain lunch counters. Like, that was the rule of the land. That was the law of the land. That Black folks were less than and did not have the ability to sit with everybody else. That's my thing about being other in this country. And right now, child, the other people, the clearer people are afraid. Well, not all of them, because there are some really good, clear people. I've worked with them. I've known them in life. But there are some people who are afraid that the dynamics of the thread and the fabric of the color of this country is changed. Not changing, it has changed. And listen, I'm going to tell you this just from my DNA journey alone. When I look at my cousins, my third, fourth, and fifth cousins that are clear folk, I can tell you some of these people, they scared. They are not fully what they think they are. We are all a creation of a mixture of everybody. And if you really, really, really understand history, everybody black, period. We all from Africa. We just all emanated, migrated, and moved out of Africa. That changed our DNA. That changed our genetics. But at the end of every single day, we all black. Okay, let me get to the chat. This is how I can't get through one of his books, child, because it triggers this. He triggers me. I'm going to get back. I got to start this whole paragraph over. All right, everybody else give it. Hey, Foxy girl. Hey, boo. Good morning, sunshine. All right, Eagles, you're good. It is. It's good to see you. Yes. I haven't been able to catch you live either. Usually when I get off of here in the morning, child, my days have been, and it's been summer. It's just been a different world. And now my whole world is about to be turned flip side, upside down. I have no idea what my life is about to look like after Friday. Well, I still have my mornings for a couple more days next week. I think Monday, Tuesday. I don't know about Wednesday, but I think I'm good on Wednesday, child. I don't know. I've just been getting bombarded with emails from my new job. So I don't know, but yes. All right. Back into the book. I'm going to stay focused, y'all. I'm going to try. Most people today don't understand. It was not only frowned upon, but illegal for Black people to sit down and eat at a segregated lunch counter. It was against the law for Black people and white people to sit next to each other on a public bus. It was illegal for a Black person to drink from a water fountain marked white or to sit down in a segregated waiting room at the train or bus station. We believe that if we could find a way to demonstrate that the basis of these regulations was false, the soul of humanity will rise up in righteous indignation and demand that we bring this hypocrisy to an end. The simple act of Black and white passengers sitting next to each other on a bus was revolutionary during the Freedom Rides because it confronted a falsehood that had been confirmed by man-made law. It was not the ride itself that was so powerful, but the truth demonstrated by those riders that was a radical concept in that age. The March on Washington was powerful because people from all over the country rejected the false boundaries set up by concepts of division and were determined to bear witness to the truth. The truth was crystallized by King's speech that day. The power of his speech was not in the resonance of his voice, the prestige of the platform, or the cadence of his words. It was in the clear truth it articulates. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. MLK Jr. The idea of hundreds of Black citizens taking to the streets and marching en masse through downtown Nashville or in Birmingham, Selma, or Washington, D.C. was considered drastic because it challenged the muteness of our time and the society that had shut its mouth and turned its head in denial of the truth. Our souls were telling us something was wrong, but the status quo seemed formidable. The narrative of racial segregation had been confirmed for centuries by the skewed deductions of celebrated scientists, by the elegant verses of venerated poets, and the teachings of erudite educators. It had been eloquently defended by politicians and presidents and ferociously enforced by police. It had been sermonized and sanctified by ministers and upheld by the highest courts. Books were written, laws were constructed, and even the word of God was deemed to rationalize separation based on superficial differences. Certainly, this mountain of material justified the need to aggressively segregate to avoid the foreboding consequences of race dilution. The very idea of masses of Black people marching on Washington actually struck fear in the hearts of thousands across America. Child, listen, all of these Second Amendment rights people on January the 6th didn't have a problem with all of the clearer people, lighter people of a different supposedly race carrying guns and doing all of the things. But child, back in the day when the Black Panther Party united and had guns, baby, they had to dismantle. So I'm going to tell you this. It only applies when the so-called majority can bear arms in unity. It only applies when the so-called majority can gather together in unity. But when the other browner people and races come together in unity, baby, they be shaking in their boots. All right, Eagle said, I did a 40-day live series in June through July, so I haven't been on after that, but I have done a few uploads and a few shorts. So next week you'll be back. Awesome. I'll be looking for you. I probably won't be live very much after Tuesday or Wednesday next week in the mornings, but I'll be, my schedule will be on weekends because, yeah, I'll be on weekends like I used to be because school starts for me next week. But I'm so excited to see you here, Eagles. All right, let's go back. The very idea of masses of Black people marching on Washington actually struck fear in the hearts of thousands across America. But by taking these actions and confirming our adherence to peace, regardless of any negative threats or admonitions raging around us, our insistence on action that was in keeping with the truth became a powerful mirror by which society could see itself. When we took action that belied everything many people thought was true, people began to see their fear for what it was: a mere shadow of reality, a specter that had no substance. And through the protests in the Deep South, where government-sponsored brutality enforced unjust laws, people watching on television could perceive the seemly consequences of believing a set of distorted facts. They could see the logical conclusion of their irrational fears, and by witnessing the ugly result in others, they were more willing to admit they were wrong. They were more willing to change. By standing in our truth, we affirmed our value and asserted our inalienable right to exist. Can y'all listen? Let that sink in. As a human being, Black people, brown people had to just affirm our value and assert our inalienable right to just exist. Just exist in this country. And when we don't bring that history or understand that history in this present day, we do ourselves a disservice. When people talk about, oh, slavery was just so long ago, it doesn't like all of that fabric of history is a part of our country. That is what was the foundation, our laws, our systems, our institutions. Even just think about financial legacy, inherited wealth. Our people were not able to participate in the systems of this country for such a long time. Yes, we have certain people who are in the 1% bracket of financial security in this country. But the people who have the legacy of inherited wealth, it's not the black and brown people. That old money, that long money, that generational wealth, we were not able to participate in that system, y'all. And we need to understand that. And we need to do better. Y'all, get y'all kids some life insurance, please, please, please. When they are born, when they are infants, get them a life insurance policy. Let's stop doing these GoFundMes for our children and our babies and ourselves. If you can't do nothing else, get them a life insurance policy that you will hand them when they are able to pay that low premium so that they don't have to worry about that. Pass that on to generations. Invest in your children and yourselves. Banking, savings, gold bars, all of the things. Create generational wealth for your future. Okay, let me go back, child, because I'm on a tangent. Hey, Gordo Poppy. Hey, boo. Good morning, sunshine. Oh, no, you're good. You're good, Eagles. Thank you for speaking to everybody. All right. By standing in our truth, we affirmed our value and asserted our inalienable right to exist. By marching in mass, we were saying, we are not invisible. We are unmistakably real. We are not second-class citizens, but equal and open to all human experience. We do not accept or deserve disdain or abuse. We are human beings, not shuffling or bent, but erect, proud, and standing tall. We are citizens of this nation who have a right to be heard and have a right to fully participate. We were saying we would not be intimidated anymore. We are different, but we are equal. From our earliest memories, I was fundamentally disturbed by the unbridled meanness of the world around me. Though I was not yet familiar with the words of the Declaration of Independence, I could feel in my bones that segregation was wrong, and I felt I had an obligation to change it. I was born on a farm in rural Alabama into a family of sharecroppers who had been working the cotton, corn, and peanut fields of Alabama for generations. If y'all don't know y'all family's history and how far you are removed from slavery, y'all should do the work. It will change your perspective of who you are. It will connect you to your ancestors. Y'all, your ancestors have been waiting for you to get in touch with them. Their energy has been surrounding you your entire life. They've been watching and waiting. It is now, and you are the one that they have been waiting for. Get into it, y'all. I promise you, it will change who you are. Sharecropping took many different forms in different states, but mainly it was a system designed to make us fail. Our work was undervalued, our debt inflated, making it almost impossible to get ahead. Ooh, that made me think about APRs. Yeah. Check your APRs on your credit cards, student loans, housing. Your interest rates can make you or break you. Cars, child, stop it with all of these high interest cars y'all like to floss around in and stop leasing. Stop leasing cars. It's a trap. I lived in that trap for a long time. Leasing cars is a trap. And I'm not going to lie. I love me a brand new, shiny, smell good, clean, pretty car every 2 years. It was my thing. Stop it. We were never paid a living wage, so we had to carry punishing debt. Punishing debt. Debt is a monster. To buy the necessary tools and supplies we needed in order to farm. To me, it was a vicious cycle I plainly perceived, even as a young boy, that was intended to keep us in poverty. But living on that farm, enveloped by the contrasting purity of innocence of nature, often sequestered from a world that seemed tragically unjust and unfair, I searched inside myself and developed an ability to hear my inner voice speak. As a young boy, I joined the church because I felt a calling to the ministry at an early age. I knew I wanted to preach, and my first sermon was to the chickens in the barnyard. I loved those gangly, clucking, cooing creatures. To me, they seemed so defenseless and so naive. No one ever expected much of them. Child, listen, I got to pause. This made me think of that preacher that's in New York right now, y'all. Listen, he ain't the only one, but he the one that's on social media blowing up. Because he has a flock of people who have made him rich. And he running around in $1 million jewelry, getting robbed in church, making all kind of excuses for why his church is in shambles, but he got gold and diamonds and jewels and dripping. Y'all, please, please, please be mindful of who you let lead you. Please be mindful of who you let feed your soul. There are so many false prophets out here. So many false prophets. I pray that you have discernment in who you let feed your soul and who you give your resources to. They were the least respected members of the barnyard. No one tried to distinguish them from one another. They didn't have names. They were voiceless, anonymous, invisible, and ultimately slaughtered. Perhaps I identified with their jeopardy, but somehow it became my mission as a young boy to offer them dignity and love. I would preach to them to fortify their capacity to be good with a conviction that only a child could have. And I sensed that they heard me. When I would enter the chicken coop, I retreated to a world where unspoken affection was the only currency. The chickens would squawk at first, but then settle down and get very still. We bonded. I loved them, and they loved me back. I would talk to them, try to guide and instruct them, and fuss over them the way my parents, aunts, and uncles fussed over me. I was only about 6 years old, but I could feel them understanding all of this somehow, and I could tell they were responding to my love in the knowing, reassuring way that animals have. My parents were deeply religious, and I was a boy preacher in a community of simple people with game-changing faith. The first time I realized that the world saw me as inferior, a reject, a substandard creation is etched indelibly in my brain. I took a trip to the little town of Troy with my father. Troy was the place he would sell his share of the crops, settle his bills, and purchase new supplies. At 6 years old, this should have been a moment of pride for me. It was my first trip into town, a big deal for a country boy. It made me feel a bit older and a little more important to go on this journey with my dad. But the moment I left the nurturing circle of my community, my glee was slammed by the steel fist of hate. When we got to town, I could not help but notice the demeaning way my father was treated. He was the man I looked up to, loved, and respected, but he was assaulted by words and abuse, called boy, addressed by his first name, directed to submit to the worst violence, and dared to mount any defense. And then there were the signs that dotted the entrances to so many businesses up and down Main Street. They screamed out a degradation that pursued me like a clanging indictment of my existence. White women, colored women, white men, colored men, white waiting, colored waiting. My skin color was a part of me I could never change, a characteristic that I did not choose and was not responsible for. So this derision seemed hopeless to contain. It was as though the whole world was shouting out that I was defective, somehow poorly made. Those signs were humiliating, painful symbols that the world around me denied my worth. Years later, as a teenager in high school, I remember reading about the U.S. Supreme Court decision on Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka in the newspaper. The news story seemed to suggest that the public schools would at last be integrated. I wanted to jump for joy. Every day, I would rumble and bump on an old broken down school bus over the dirt roads in my neck of the woods to the smoothness of the paved roads in the city. There, I would see white children glide by on nice, clean buses that dropped them off at big, impressive buildings made of brick or stone. Some even had columns. There were dozens of classrooms in those schools, and upstairs and downstairs, new books, and all kinds of facilities to help students learn. Y'all, they still segregate children with these residency laws that they created, so that if you don't live in a certain zip code, you cannot go to certain schools. Even if you can get your kid to that school every day without the use of school buses, schools are still segregated, period. It's a woman in jail. I don't know if she's still in jail. I didn't follow up on her story, but I remember some years ago, she got 5 years in jail for enrolling her kid into a school that was outside of her area code or zip code. 5 years. How does that happen in this country still? It shouldn't matter. You should be able to put your kids in whatever school you can get them to. Listen. And I think if y'all listened yesterday, I told y'all my story about what's happening with my son. He's a senior in high school. And because I don't work in the district anymore, I have to get a waiver to keep him in the school that he's been in or in the district that he's been in since the 5th grade. They're willing to put my son, because it can be about what's best for kids. If you're willing to push a kid out that's been there since the 5th grade because he was going there because I worked there, and now that I don't work there, oh, nope, he got to go back to where y'all live at. How is that in the best interest of a child? Our laws, these rules that men make, I'm going to say a word that Foxy hates. Trash. Trash. I was dying for the same opportunity to get a good education, so I was incredibly excited this law had finally passed. Even though I lived in a segregated environment, it had not dampened the natural attraction and curiosity children have for one another. My enthusiasm was not only about scholastic opportunity, but the excitement of making new friends. This made me think about how people think that because the older generation, the people who were around when segregation and all of that stuff was going on, are not going to exist anymore, that racism and all of the things that accompany it will eventually die away as well. No, baby, it's young people. Like, this stuff is taught generationally. There are young people who believe in all of the things of the segregation and the racism and the betterment and the biggerment of certain races over other races. And now you have certain people, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you are disabled, if you are identify as something other than what you were born as, we still have a lot of work to do on diversity in this country in general, even outside of race. There are so many factors to take into what diversity and acceptance of people who don't think like you, act like you, talk like you, look like you in this country. I saw so many students around my age. I wanted to talk to them, find out what they were like. In my heart, I felt there was so much that we could share. Every day after I read about the Brown decision, I kept expecting that one day when I climbed onto my school bus, I might see some white students on board, or maybe a new friend might just sit down beside me. He or she might attend my school, or I might be transferred to theirs. The prospects were really exciting. I kept waiting and waiting, but nothing ever happened. After a while, it became very clear that it was just business as usual in my little corner of Alabama. Life went on as though the Brown decision never happened. My expectation faded into the blur of everyday life. Sometimes I think leaders today don't realize how people hang on their words. People don't want a handout most of the time, they just want a little help. They want the people who represent them to use a little power and a little influence to help them solve some of the problems of their community. And in the 50 years I have spent in public life, I've met many people who are deeply concerned and who are trying to make a difference. I've also met many who I would say love the world, but don't actually like people. Some of them become leaders among leaders, charged to speak for the very people they don't understand, and their hearts are hardened to the struggles facing the people they represent. So, in many ways, I see that disconnection from the day to day life of ordinary people hampering politics today. There are leaders who truly believe that despite the worst recession in 80 years, the unemployed could find work if they just weren't so lazy, that the poor made critical errors that condemned them to their misfortune, that inner city youth have a lesser capacity to learn, and that the elderly should be tasked to plan better for their decline. There are leaders who seem to worship the rich. Child, listen, it's people, it's regular people who worship rich people, as though they were more worthy of privilege, more deserving of forgiveness, more justified in their mistakes than ordinary Americans. These leaders are completely disconnected from the truth of the lives of most Americans, and they hold to these misconceptions regardless of the facts. I do not know how they can ignore rising poverty, extend unemployment, food lines beginning to emerge in some states, whole families living in cars and panel trucks, and seniors choosing between medication and food. I am not sure what kind of blindness sets in, but there is still a grand denial based on the belief in the separateness of human experience that is unwilling to conform to the truth. The truth is that we are all interrelated. There will be no rich without poor, no healing without the sick, no young without the old, no first world country without a third world country. We are all inextricably linked, King said. And that is why it is futile for any group to draw lines in the sand. The vast sea of truth will merely wash those weak lines away. The preference for segregation is still rampant in our world in so many ways. The civil rights movement helped us rid ourselves of legalized discrimination, a particularly pernicious form of segregation. But our desire to exclude ourselves from one another, critique each other's worthiness, and take exception to whom we should speak, cast our eyes upon, or admit into our circle is based on a myriad rules that govern our civility or our disdain. What will it take for each of us to learn from the lessons of segregation and separation and apply them liberally to our own lives? If we are truly to learn the lessons of the civil rights movement, the Holocaust, or the conflict in Northern Ireland, and now what's happening in Ukraine, we must concede that discomfort breeds dislike. Dislike breeds disdain. Disdain breeds contempt. And contempt breeds hate. We cannot afford to relegate the victories in the struggle between love and hate to one group or another, whether they happen on American shores or not. The truth is, as long as we see life in terms of its duality instead of its commonality, our lives will always demand that we overcome. We say that we want our leaders to tell us the truth, but are we prepared to make the sacrifices required once we hear the truth? Many candidates are afraid to speak the truth because they believe the people will reject the toughest adjustments that might be called for. Y'all, I hope y'all voted yesterday. I forgot to remind y'all yesterday morning. I'm so sorry. I hope y'all voted. I know in Michigan we had elections yesterday. I'm sure it's happening across the country. The midterms in some places, or it's not the midterms, child. That's in November. Whatever happens in August, we had elections yesterday. I hope y'all voted. Y'all, please vote. If you don't believe in voting, y'all, it is your right to vote. Exercise that right to vote. It is your voice in this country. It really, really is. And you might not like all of the choices that exist, but you got to make a decision. You should not be out here complaining about what is happening if you have not exercised your vote. Please, please vote, y'all. Many candidates are afraid to speak the truth because they believe the people will reject the tough adjustments that might be called for. A cutback on services, a hike in taxes, a decision to put a halfway house in your neighborhood, to thin the population of urban deer, to close schools or military bases, or to lay people off. In order to get elected, many strategists actually recommend hiding the truth by using vague language or feel good facts. The best approach, they would say, is to resurrect the old, familiar ghosts of our past. They are comfortable, non threatening, and fulfill the people's need to verify the legends that support our national image of ourselves. Thus, it is not only the politicians, but the people also who participate in this grand denial because they don't stay engaged and informed. They allow others to interpret the facts for them. They do not do independent research. Listen, y'all, we live in a day and an age where there is no excuse for you not to use this Google machine, these interwebs that Beyonce owns, to just do some research for yourself. If you are voting, if you've never voted before and you see names on the ballot, please don't just choose the most familiar name. That is why the city of Detroit in the great state of Michigan, the Wolverine and the Great Lakes of it all, keeps choosing candidates that do not do what they should do for its constituents, because the majority of the Black people in Detroit will continue to vote for the popular name on that ballot because they don't do research. And it's not hard anymore. Stop voting for people that you're familiar with. Stop voting for people that's been in office for generations and generations, doing nothing to help your community. We need younger people. We need energetic people who will change our communities, y'all. They are exhausted by critical thinking, yet they feel betrayed when they are confronted by corruption in politics that shatters their illusions. Politicians have a fiduciary responsibility to preserve the public's trust. That goes without saying. They are responsible when they lie or break the law. But the citizens of a democracy also have a responsibility to remain engaged and informed so they cannot be easily duped. How many man on the street interviews have we seen with reasonable Americans who have no idea who the president is, don't know what the president's cabinet does, or the names of their own representatives? It is much harder to govern in a complex democracy when the people are uninformed. And y'all, it's so many Americans that just don't care. And when brave, principled politicians do tell the truth, too many times they are attacked and vilified. The people don't always want to accept the mandate the truth represents. When the people judge their representatives mainly on superficial criteria and not on the issues, it leaves more room for pretenders who talk a good game, who appear likable and down with the people to get the job. When we base our decisions mainly on superficial data, we cannot afford to be surprised when our trust is periodically betrayed. Have a rainbow and unicorn day too, Foxy. There was a time when a man or woman who considered integrity more important than getting reelected. Child, I'm going to read this again because I'm still bewildered by why the Democrats did not get into office and just tear it down. Because we already know the Republicans are about to get the majority. Like they just are. That's how this thing works. They're about to take the majority in the House and the Senate. And very likely, if the trajectory is correct and the temperature is correct in our politics, the former president is going to get reelected. Just let that sit on that for a second. Let that spin. After everything that happened, even after January the 6th, the former president will be reelected. That's just the country that we live in today. There was a time when a man or woman who considered integrity more important than getting reelected was seen as virtuous and principled. Today, no one even mentions the ideal of virtue or principle, let alone aspires to develop these values. Now it's all about the game, playing it hard and playing it smart, not telling the truth. A lie is not contemptible in these times if it can be used to get ahead. Learning said, yes, they are. Republicans, yep. And they won't care. That's my thing, Learning. They're not going to care. They're going to use every tool in their toolbox to do whatever they want to do. They did it in the last when the last president was in charge. Barack Obama could not seat a Supreme Court justice because of some artificial rule that Mitch McConnell created, right? But then when the last president got elected, 3, he was able to use Barack Obama's. He was able to appoint a new one, and then the same opportunity of window that opened up that was used, McConnell used for Barack Obama, didn't exist. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't understand the Democrats at all. They have no backbone. I would have got in there and I would have used every lever of power that I had to burn it down and start it over. I'm not going to get reelected. The Democrats ain't going to have the power in this next election cycle. So, y'all, we might as well ball out now. How? Because they work together. And until the society sees that, until our society sees that, this whole Republicans and Democrats and blah, 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 back and forth, it's all manufactured. The Republicans and the Democrats are one and the same, baby. Because there's no reason the Democrats did not get in there and do the damn thing. I just believe that. That's why all this rhetoric, Republicans, Democrats, it's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. I believe most Democrats are that girl, learning. No backbone, because there's no reason. Republicans don't be giving a damn, right? Reelect me or not. I'm about to get in here. Ted Cruz got in there and read a whole book, Green Eggs and Ham. Dr. Seuss. They don't be caring. They do all of the foolish things. He left his constituents and went to Cancun on them. They don't care. But the Democrats, they just want, like, how do you not get in there and open up that Supreme Court and put 3 more justices on there because you have the power and the ability to do so? Oh, guess what? Because behind closed doors, y'all are on the same team. It's just in public. Y'all want to get in here and act like y'all this and y'all that. No, ma'am. And all of these arguments that human beings be having out here about the Republicans versus the Democrats, y'all stupid. I'm just going to say that. Y'all stupid. It's all planned. It's all coordinated. They all are the same bird. They both need each other. The right wing and the left wing need each other to fly. Period. Perhaps that is why we have had to suffer through so many jarring revelations in our society. Journalists who fabricate stories, employees who lie about their credentials. Yep. A strategically miscalculated rush to war. Clergy Listen, that baby Brittany Griner, whatever her name is, over in Russia, they using her as a pawn right now. She had to plead guilty. And God willing, on Friday, she will be released based on whatever these backdoor deals that's going on. But it's all a game. And it makes me so sad that so many people buy into these rules and these laws that this country creates. And we justify people being locked in cages for the rest of their lives, or we justify our superiority over other people based on their past criminal behavior. Y'all need to stop it. Nobody is better than anybody. We are all flawed. We are all human beings and we are all sinners. And your sin is not greater or lesser than anybody else's based on some sliding scale that we have created in our society. A strategically miscalculated rush to war, clergy and coaches who rob children of their youth, and politicians who fiend morality but are bought and sold, just like Learning said, because it's all about the money. Gandhi would say that all exploitation or victimization is based on the cooperation, either knowing or unwitting, of the oppressed. The old foe of separation still runs rampant in a game playing society. A belief in the game suggests there is no relationship between the hoodwinked and the deceiver. The robber barons of today's mortgage fraud might have believed they got away with millions, but the tanking of our economy devalues all they stole. Nothing can break that inextricable bond between us all. Consequences can be delayed, maybe even softened, but not avoided. If one goes up, we can all rise. But if many fall, the height of the summit will be diminished. People depend on their leadership to help maintain stability and peace. The most vulnerable, the most susceptible people in our society especially deserve the truth. It took a long time for me to truly understand why nothing changed in my world after the Brown decision. But once I discovered the truth, I was prepared to give my life to revolution. Segregation aggravated so many who experienced it, but those who stayed in Alabama found a way to manage their vexation. I never could. It rubbed me the wrong way all the time. I was not so much angry as deeply disappointed at the meanness that weighed down all my interactions with the outside world. Today, I see the sadness in the eyes of the hungry children of Somalia, the trafficked girls of India or Russia, all the children growing up in conflict zones, and so many others suffering the worst this world has to offer. These children have radiance, but their eyes reveal injustices they witness but cannot terminate in their imagination. In the few pictures I have of my childhood, even as a little boy, I am not smiling and joyful, though I experienced many happy times. Even at a young age, I can see the pensive question in my eyes as I strain to understand why it had to be this way. I never let sadness get the best of me, though. People often say, John, you are too optimistic. They think I am too hopeful, unrealistic, even naive. But I see myself as a believer who has witnessed the evolution of what others believed would never change. Some would say the goal of our activism was legislative victory, but that is more a conclusion drawn from the outcome of the movement rather than from the ideas that deeply motivated us. We had been denied our civil liberties for so long that we did not expect the government to be fair or to grant what we were demanding. Our primary goal was to emerge from the shaded confines of a lie and walk freely in the light of truth. Even though we had been rejected by society, we believed that all people had the capacity to be good. We believed not only we, but the perpetrators of violence were victims as well, who began their lives in innocence, but were taught to hate, abuse, and draw distinctions between themselves and others. We held no malice toward them and believed in the power of the truth to penetrate that negative conditioning and remind people of their innocence once again. We focused on the end we hoped to see and kept our eyes on that prize. We could not waste time harboring bitterness or resentment. We knew that our focus had to be on what we hoped to create, not the indignities we were pressing to leave behind. Hating our aggressors was like looking back when we wanted to move forward. We had to use our energy to manifest our dreams, and entertaining animosity would have given more power to the status quo. If we truly believed in oneness, then we could not allow ourselves to engage in the same violence as our wayward brothers and sisters. Though some might justify any retaliation in light of the brutality we faced, we asked where retribution ends and wanton violence began. We could not use the tactics we hoped to eradicate, or we would be no better than those committing crimes against us. Instead, we decided to use the truth as a sword to penetrate the rationale of injustice and awaken the consciousness of a society that had looked the other way. That in the that is the main reason we were particular about the way we dressed, because we wanted to be identified as upstanding citizens. The men wore suits and ties, while the women looked dignified in conservative dresses. We had to be seen the way most Americans viewed themselves, helping to bridge the gap between any stereotype that perceived us as different and the truth that we were not. Our method of demonstration in many instances was the sit-in because it was simple. It was nonviolent. It was a nonviolent act that illustrated the harmlessness of human connection, the innocence of sharing a meal at a lunch counter or a seat on a bus. The sit-in exposed the absurdity of barring the natural ability of people to flow to one another, and it revealed the monstrous, outlandish fear that had accumulated over centuries of compliance with injustice. Society had drawn a line in the sand, and we crossed it without apology. Our approach was not passive, as some people believed. It was uncompromising. Southerners saw it as a forward and aggressive approach based on Mohandas Gandhi's fundamental tactic, Satyagraha, which means holding to the truth, or more literally, insistence on the truth. The sit-in confronted society and forced it to look in the mirror at its own reflection. Through our own independent study and our guided workshops with Reverend Jim Lawson, a man called the mystic of the movement, we came to recognize that the pain of our social experience was in part due to our own acceptance of it. We all bore the psychic wounds of racism embedded in our being. This was no fault of our own. Blame was not the issue. Centuries of conditioning assured our compliance. And it was critical that we engage in a process that allowed us to perceive our complicity with this malicious order. Then we would be freed from knee jerk responses to the hatred we had so intimately known, free to map out our alliance with the truth. As citizens, we knew we had ceded some of our individual rights to society in order to live together as a community. But we did not believe this social contract included support for an immoral system. Since the people invested government with its authority, we understood that we had to obey the law. But when the law became suppressive and tyrannical, when human law violated divine principles, we felt it was not only our right, but our duty to disobey. As Henry Thoreau strongly believed, to comply with an unjust system is to accept abuse. It is not the role of the citizen to follow the government down a path that violates his or her own conscience. This, in our estimation, was not a valid expression of our consent to be governed. So we were obligated to find a way to align our souls with the truth. Violence was not an option because it exemplified the very wrong we were seeking to correct. And it was not a rational, strategic choice because it met our opponents on their territory where they would surely dominate. Non-violent, non-cooperation through the sit-in, the stand-in, through the protest march was the most eloquent way we could signal our resistance to what was wrong and assert what was right. We believed that if we held strong, regardless of beatings, arrests, or jailings, the divine spark that is in all of us would bear witness to the truth. And the soul of each witness would wrestle with its own conscience and demand to be reconciled with the truth. They threw everything at us in the 60s. The 60s, y'all. I was born in the 70s. This is not forever ago. I think younger people in their 30s and probably early 40s are starting to understand. I know I am. The goal is to get old, right? When I was 20, I thought 50 was old. It's older, but it is goals. There are so many young people that don't age. They don't get to see older. We need to help younger people understand that aging is your goal. Getting older is your goal. And there is so much wisdom in the elderly, in the older generation. There is wisdom. The goal is to grow. You don't have to recreate the wheels of life. Pick up from where the older generation left off and do better, grow better. They threw everything at us in the 60s in an attempt to deny the validity of our reality. They called us communists and hippies, outside agitators and troublemakers. They infiltrated us and investigated us. They floated false rumors and negative propaganda. They ran us down with horses and bludgeoned us with billy clubs, and baseball bats. They jailed us, they beat us, they bombed us, they sprayed us with tear gas and fire hoses. They even assassinated a president, a candidate, and a king. President John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. were three symbols of hope. They were three men, three leaders who were sensitive to the truth. Those two brothers began their term as president and attorney general without a real understanding of the problems of race in the South. But through the protests and the demonstrations, they came to understand how deeply we suffered. They began to hear the mandate to address the very hypocrisy Dr. King spoke about. These men grew. They changed because of what they experienced. And that is all you can ask of another person. Don't close your eyes because you are afraid of what you see. Be honest in your assessment. Transformation and revelation require an adjustment from what we know to what we know can be. Had President Kennedy lived, I don't know what would have happened. I met him only a few times before he was killed, but I do know that in the time I interacted with him, he changed. He was not locked into one game plan or partisan agenda. He was interested in the human agenda, and he wanted to serve. There is no doubt he was a shrewd politician. He was what he called a pragmatic idealist. But he was also a good man who defined success as the ability to use his political skill to conform the convoluted ways of politics to the mandate of what was right. I got to know Bobby Kennedy very well. I worked on his presidential campaign, and in fact, I was with him in California. I had seen him minutes before his speech and was in the Ambassador Hotel watching when we heard the news that he had been shot. Had he lived, I believe he would have been elected president. I think this nation would have followed a different course, leading us to a more humane, sustainable democracy. People have said he was a tough, sharp-tongued attorney general. But I saw him grow to be so much more. Bobby had passion. When he became aware of the plight of the common man, he applied his passion to our defense. The loss of his brother and his growing awareness through the movement of the tragic disenfranchisement of the poor gave him a compassion I have rarely seen in any politician to this day. On the campaign trail, Bobby purposefully veered off the beaten track to visit Americans in their hometowns, to see for himself the conditions of the people he hoped to lead. He went to the Mississippi Delta, to the hills of Kentucky. He visited farm workers in the fields of California to see their faces and look them in the eyes. He showed them he was a man of the people who was not afraid to stand with them where they lived. And he asked to be their champion in the fight to lift them up. I loved Bobby Kennedy. I loved him for his ability to be vulnerable, to be touched and moved, for his ability to throw open his heart and discover a connection to all humankind. In his brother's eulogy, Edward Kennedy said this about Bobby: "My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it." I think this is a legacy to which we should all aspire. Of all the leaders in the movement, Martin Luther King Jr. was closest in age to me, so he was like my big brother. He was also my hero. If it had not been for Martin Luther King Jr., I don't know where I would be today. I would probably not be a member of Congress. I might still be in Alabama picking cotton, preaching to the chickens, and railing against the oppression that was consuming me. Martin Luther King Jr. taught an entire generation how to speak truth to power, how to stand up, speak out, and speak up for what was principled and right. He taught us how to defend our human dignity, how to struggle for a higher cause. Yet his message was love, and his method was creative, nonviolent resistance to evil. He exemplified with his life a moral path to follow that has eternal power, and his words and his legacy have inspired legions of people struggling for freedom all around the world. That is why it is so fitting and so appropriate that he be honored today on the National Mall, because he freed not just a people, but an entire nation from the burden of hate. Through his leadership, people young and old, black and white, from different parts of America and from nations around the world were able to expose the falsehood of division. The idea that there is a separation between us that makes one person somehow better than the other. The stain of this lie has permeated American history and has embedded in the fabric of American life, not just in the South, but across this country. His leadership and his activism helped to redeem the soul of America, a nation destined for greatness, but tarnished by a persistent, nagging untruth. This one man became the symbol of the need to build a true democracy in America. And that is why he stands in the shadow of America's greatest presidents, within the line of sight of the monuments of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln. He was never elected to any public office. He was a simple preacher from Atlanta, Georgia, but he transformed an entire nation by standing on the power of truth. I knew these three young men. I loved them, and they were shot down in the battle for justice. When they died, I mourned. I knew my life would never be the same. So many people I knew simply dropped out and disappeared. Some I never saw again. To this day, I still feel it is my moral obligation as one person who knew them all, who still has a vote on the floor of the House, to ask myself when I have to make a tough decision. What would Martin do? What would Bobby Kennedy do in this situation? Each person must find his or her own inner compass, the thing one turns to when trying to distinguish truth from lies and right from wrong. Despite everything that has happened, regardless of the pain of their loss, despite all the other nonviolent, peaceful warriors who suffered and sometimes failed, I have never once considered giving up or giving out. I could not let myself get lost in a sea of despair because I had faith that the truth is bigger than all humanity. The tragedy of their loss was a crisis of faith. But in that struggle, I discovered that you can kill a Medgar Evers or a Jimmy Lee Jackson. You can kill 3 civil rights workers named Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner. You can bomb 4 innocent little girls in church on a Sunday morning. You can even kill 3 of the finest leaders of the 20th century. But you cannot kill the truth they represented. The truth marches on, and it is not connected to the life of any one individual. When a person dies, the dream does not die. You can kill a man, but the truth that he stood for will never die. Each one of these people sacrificed their lives for the truth, and each death, each loss prevailed upon every one of us in this nation to put away the lies of segregation and separation and come closer to the truth. And it lives today in the hearts and minds of young people who have no comprehension of the lie that characterized American societies just a few decades ago. They cannot even understand it. Society has moved in the direction of greater unity to the degree that young people today cannot even comprehend the spiritual struggle of the 60s. It bewilders and befuddles them that it was once illegal for 2 people to sit down next to each other on a public bus, sleep in the same hotel, or share a meal together. Sometimes when I tell these stories to little children, they begin to cry because they feel the pain of that injustice. In the end, the truth obliterated an illusion that people paid with their own souls to uphold. That is why I say Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement liberated not just a people, but an entire nation from the degradation of hostility and hate. Some resent the national holiday in Martin's name and question whether he deserves a memorial on the National Mall. Child, it's YouTube creators, it's people on social media questioning his legacy. And it makes me so sad. I see it as a testament to the truth he represented. It will stand as a symbol of a man and a movement that injected new meaning, as he would say, into the very veins of civilization. We have come a long way, but there is still a great deal of work to do. There is still too much separation and division, too much hatred and discrimination in our nation and our world today. But the presence of evil does not negate the power of good. When people ask me whether the civil rights movement was successful in light of all the attempts to turn back the clock, I can answer affirmatively without a doubt. As much of our work was grounded in truth, it will stand the test of time. It was never our job to save all of humankind, but to do what we could to rescue ourselves and our generation from the confirming illusions of hate. And by doing so, we served all of humankind. We were one radiant light that did shine and others, electrified by the cause of freedom, must follow their own light of truth. Each generation must do its part for freedom to ring. There are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. Buddha. Each person must act according to the dictates of his or her conscience. You must search for the truth. Seek it out. Do not allow yourself to be blown by the prevailing winds of our time, but try your best to reach down to the core, to the central foundation of the truth. Through a time of struggle or difficulty, you must hold on to the principles that define you. And when all else fails, just hold on. People have asked me, what happened to the dream? I say to them, and I say to you, the dream is us. I thank you for being here. I thank you for tuning in. I love you, and I hope you have a blessed and a wonderful day, week, month, year, and life.